Welcome back to the Coffee Hour. I'm Andy Bates.
I'm Sarah Gulseth.
Recently, strong storms and hurricanes have been wreaking havoc across the Gulf. Today, we have Reverend Michael Meyer, manager for LCMS Disaster Response, joining us for an update on the storms in the Gulf, particularly in Louisiana. Pastor Meyer, thanks so much for being our guest on the Coffee Hour today.
You are welcome.
What communities have been impacted by hurricanes and storms in the Gulf region?
Well, Andy, the communities have really spanned across two of our districts in the LCMS, the Texas district and the Southern district. The bulk of the communities, the bulk of those congregations that were impacted were in southwest Louisiana near Lake Charles. There's a couple of other smaller communities, Sulphur, Jennings, Iota. Those were communities that were hit as well, DeRidder, north of Lake Charles. And then on the Texas side, the damage was almost exclusively in the Port Arthur, Beaumont, Orange area. That's the part of Texas they call the Golden Triangle. So it's the really southeastern side of the state.
What's the damage look like in those communities?
Well, there is just a significant amount of wind damage. When this was coming, they were expecting the wind damage, but they were also expecting a lot of flood damage. And what we saw was that the storm moved fast enough and it came in at a time where the tides were not at their highest, and so they were spared the worst of what could have been a very, very brutal storm surge. So there wasn't actually a whole lot of flooding, but the wind damage is really substantial. You can drive through the community, and 19 out of 20 homes have damage to their roofs, whether it's a tree on their roof or whether it's an awning that is blown off. And so when you look at that roof damage, you know that even if the rest of the house looks okay, there's damage on the inside from that water that would have come in through that damaged roof. So, and then there's, of course, trees down all over the place. So every single individual homeowner is going to have problems with these trees.
So probably lots of chainsaw teams are going to be needed in the near future, it sounds like.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of chainsaw teams and a lot of chainsaw work here. And we expect this to be about maybe a 2 to 4 month response, actually, with our chainsaw teams. And, you know, as far as our volunteers are concerned, we have a really lot of good qualified volunteers who like to come out and help our congregations, help our Lutheran members be graceful and show mercy to our other neighbors in the community. But one of the things that we're working on building within that community of volunteers are the certified chainsaw users. It's we would call it a select group because it's a pretty dangerous tool to wield and use. And it requires additional training, but we do have a number of good teams scattered throughout the LCMS who are able to come in, provide debris removal, cut up these trees, use some equipment like skid steers and bobcat walk behinds with grappling hooks on the front to grab the branches and the trunks and drop them off at the side of the road, and really saving the homeowner thousands and thousands of dollars compared to having to pay for somebody to come in and do it, because our volunteers do all this work for free.
What communities were you able to visit along with others from LCMS Disaster Response?
Yeah, so we visited primarily Lake Charles and Sulphur, but we saw the communities on Interstate 10 as we were coming in. We flew into New Orleans and drove through Baton Rouge, Lafayette, and you can kind of see as you get closer into Lake Charles, the damage increases. And then we went past that into the Texas district and visited Grace Lutheran Church in Orange. So St. John's is in Lake Charles. Trinity Lutheran Church is in Sulphur, and Grace was in Orange. Those were the three primary locations that we went to. And the reason we went really this early is so that we can work at the logistics of figuring out, all right, which one of these places is going to be a good spot to house volunteer teams to come down. So that's really when we go and visit, that's the reason we're there. Yes, we want to provide care to the pastors that we might visit and show compassion to them. But primarily we want to say, all right, what do we need to put into place? Who do we need to work with in order to get what we need to house those volunteers?
What is the damage to those churches?
Well, both in Orange, Texas, and Sulphur, Louisiana, they had awnings and roof damage. And I think once they get in to the church there in Sulphur, they're going to probably see that they had some water damage come in. The church in Lake Charles was impacted pretty significantly. So if you get onto our Facebook page, you'll be able to see a couple of photos, even some video of this congregation, St. John's in Lake Charles. They had some stained glass windows on either side of their congregation, of their sanctuary, with brick in between them, and just huge sections of these sidewalls collapsed into the. One of them collapsed all over the pews inside the sanctuary, and there's probably literally 4,000 or 5,000 pounds worth of bricks landed on these pews, and so the wind just blew right through. You go through their preschool building. And there's roof damage. It blew in the soffits, and then the wind blew down into the classrooms, and so it impacted the ceilings. And virtually every classroom in their preschool had some level of damage from that. So it's gonna be a lot of cleanup. It's gonna be a lot of work for them. But like I said, we've got some volunteer teams that are already planning on coming in to help with that debris removal and setting up the capacity for additional volunteers down the road to come in and provide help and assistance.
Now, you mentioned 2 to 4 month outlook for the chainsaw teams. What is that outlook for the volunteer teams that are coming in?
Well, in many respects, it's going to parallel that chainsaw work 2 to 4 months, because the bulk of the work for the homeowners is going to be some basic debris removal, but it's all related around the chainsaw work. Here in the next couple of weeks, we're going to get further assessments, because some of these homeowners, insurance along the Gulf Coast works differently than it does here in the Midwest. For a named storm like this, the deductible is normally pegged at a certain percentage of the value of the home. So it's not a known quantity of $2,000 to $3,000 or $4,000 for a deductible that many of us in the Midwest might have. They may be looking at $20,000 deductibles as a homeowner, or $50,000 to $60,000 for a congregation, just to pay the deductible before the insurance steps in and does any help and assistance. And that's if they had the right kind of insurance, because their wind insurance is generally a different kind of insurance than the typical severe weather that we would have here in the Midwest.
Yeah, I remember from my time in Florida that hurricane insurance was pretty common in that area. So it's a separate or an additional policy specifically addressing the issues of that might result from a hurricane.
Right.
How are the LCMS congregations in those communities positioned to respond and to respond to the needs of the community?
Yeah, now really it has so much to do with location, right? These congregations are in the heart of the areas where that are populated, but we're also impacted by the hurricane. So their locations can't be better, and they both have. But when I say both, I mean Sulphur, Louisiana, and Lake Charles. They both have property that is easily accessible. Right. So we have a number of our chainsaw teams that are self-contained. They come down in their RVs, and they bring everything that they need to sustain their own life and work for several weeks at a time. And so they've got the spacing for this, and we're working with those congregations to get electrical, to get plumbing, and all these things, so that they can basically RVs can come in and they can unhook them from their trucks and hook them up to the infrastructure that's going to be there at the church, and then they can just kind of set it and forget it, so to speak, right? So that they're there, and they can stay self-contained. They can be separated. We live in interesting times. It's the first major hurricane we've responded to since the COVID-19 crisis began, right? And so we're looking at this volunteer coordination a little differently than we did 6-8 months ago. So we're trying to figure out how can we keep our volunteers segregated, separate, safe, so that they have kind of places that they can go back to and be a little separated from the other volunteers, and yet still have an opportunity to go out and impact the community and proclaim the gospel in the midst of what they're doing.
How has COVID affected this response? Has it affected it in any additional ways?
Yeah, primarily it's the number of volunteers that we would normally see after a disaster that are just, emailing us and calling us and want to come in and help. That number is quite a bit lower than it is this time around. And on one hand, that's okay because the chainsaw work that's required on this one it's a little more skilled. It's a little there's fewer volunteers that can do it, but there are going to be needs for the general volunteer as we go forward in these next 2 to 4 months, and we're going to have an ability, a way for them to do that. We're partnering with Orphan Grain Train to bring down shower trailers and bunkhouse trailers that are divided, so that each of these trailers are going to be divided into 3 bedrooms, so to speak, with 2 different beds. So a couple can sleep there, or a small group that they've traveled together. They've already been exposed to each other in that regard, and they're not as concerned about maybe spreading germs from amongst themselves. But then another group could come in, a small group, 2 or 3 or even 1. Can come into this little bedroom unit and stay for a night. They can stay for a week. They could stay for a month and help out. So the number of volunteers, I think, is the biggest thing that we're having to deal with. But then also there's some education too, right? Our volunteers always go out wearing the right personal protective equipment, and that means that they're taking those precautions to not catch anything that might be in the environment as a result of the disaster. And those protections are helpful now in COVID. So in many respects, most of our volunteers are already prepared to volunteer in a safe way. Now it's just educating and saying, you know what, this is very similar to the local restrictions and guidelines that may be in place regarding masks or social distancing and whatnot.
And I know in many disasters like this, the timing of the arrival of volunteers is important as well. Having volunteers too early isn't necessarily helpful. Too late isn't necessarily helpful as well. Do you have an idea when volunteers are they ready for volunteers at this point, or is that still in the future?
The only volunteer that they're ready for at this point right now is the fully self-contained volunteer, the one that goes in with an RV, and the hookups aren't there yet for those RVs. So they would have to know that they're 100% on their own for electricity. They have to have their generator because the community is going to be without for a couple of months. They have to have their own water. They have to have and be ready to take their RV to a dump station to get rid of the wastewater. So they have to be self-contained at this point. This weekend is when we're hoping to get that extra equipment from Orphan Grain Train down there, so that we can those first couple of teams this weekend and early next week, they're going to be helping to set those up so that the other volunteers can come down in the weeks and months to come.
And where can we watch for more information in the future?
Yeah, we're going to be providing updates on our Facebook page. You can keyword LCMS Disaster Response if you're not already following us on Facebook. You can also check out our website, lcms.org/disaster. We'll have updates there in the form of reporter articles and other things as well.
The Reverend Michael Meyer, Manager, LCMS Disaster Response. Thank you so much for the update today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
You're listening to the Coffee Hour. I'm Andy Bates.
I'm Sarah Golseth.
The Coffee Hour with Andy and Sarah is a production of KFUO. To support the Coffee Hour and KFUO Radio, visit KFUO.org. You can also text KFUO to 41444 or send an email to gifts@kfuo.org. And you can call us at 800-844-0524. KFUO. Christ for you, anytime, anywhere.